He was the man who became Iron Man, the face of Marvel, the heartbeat of a billion-dollar empire, and the hero adored by millions across the world. To fans, Robert Downey Jr. was Tony Stark himself, witty, brilliant, invincible. The ultimate comeback story, the man who turned failure into triumph. But behind the mask of Iron Man lies a truth far more complicated. Before the red carpets, before the box office billions, Robert Downey Jr. was a broken man. He was Hollywood's cautionary tale, the actor who had it all and then threw it away in a haze of addiction. He was arrested multiple times, found wandering into strangers' homes under the influence, thrown into prison cells, mocked by tabloids, and written off by studios as uninsurable. At one point, his fall was so steep that even his friends believed he would never recover. And yet he did. Against all odds, Robert Downey Jr. clawed his way back from the edge. From the depths of self-destruction to the highest peak of Hollywood glory, his story is not just about fame, but about survival. But survival came at a price. The cost of his rise, the pain of his downfall, and the shadow of his past still linger behind the charm and charisma. This is not the polished fairy tale Marvel wants you to see. This is the untold truth, the secret history of Robert Downey Jr., the boy who was handed drugs before he turned 10, the genius who nearly destroyed himself, the fallen star who rose again as a legend. But the truth behind Robert Downey Jr.'s redemption is much darker than anyone ever imagined. Part 2. Childhood and Formation. Long before Robert Downey Jr. became Iron Man, he was just Robert, a boy born into chaos. He entered the world on the 4th of April, 1965, in Manhattan, New York, to Robert Downey Sr. and Elsie Ann Ford. On the surface, his childhood seemed artistic, colorful, even glamorous. His father was an avant-garde filmmaker, known for wild, experimental movies. His mother was an actress. The Downey household was never short of creativity. But beneath that creativity lurked instability and shadows that would shape Robert for the rest of his life. From the very beginning, Robert's world was saturated with drugs. His father, Robert Downey Sr., struggled with addiction himself. In later years, Downey Jr. would describe his father not just as a parent, but as the one who gave me the drugs that would nearly kill me. At only 6 years old, little Robert was handed a joint by his father, marijuana offered casually, as if it were candy. It was framed as a bonding experience, father and son sharing a secret ritual. But it was, in truth, the beginning of a nightmare. By the time most children were learning how to ride bikes, Robert was already being introduced to substances that no child should know. Drugs weren't forbidden in his home, they were everywhere. To him, this was normal. To him, this was family. And yet, deep down, he would later admit that those early choices robbed him of a real childhood. The instability went beyond drugs. His parents' marriage was turbulent. Constant arguments, shifting priorities, and financial struggles made home life unpredictable. When his parents eventually divorced in 1978, Robert was just 13. The separation left him torn between two worlds, carrying wounds that never fully healed. He would later say that addiction became a way to deal with the pain of his broken home. Still, even amid the chaos, there was talent. Young Robert was a natural performer. He appeared in his father's films from as early as 5 years old, stealing scenes with his sharp wit and expressive eyes. Acting wasn't just something he did, it was something he lived. The camera gave him focus, a sense of identity in a life where everything else felt unsteady. But outside the set, Robert's childhood was scattered. He moved frequently, following his parents' unstable lives. He lived in New York, then Connecticut, then California, then London. By the time he was a teenager, he had attended multiple schools, never staying long enough to feel rooted. At one point, he enrolled in the Perry House School in England, where he studied ballet. Later, he returned to the United States, attending Santa Monica High School, but he dropped out at 17. Instead of finishing school, Robert packed his bags and moved to New York City. He wasn't running away, he was running towards something. He wanted to be an actor, to carve out a life of his own. But beneath that ambition was also a silent inheritance, a fractured childhood, an intimate familiarity with drugs, and a longing for stability he had never known. He found refuge in the theater scene, taking odd jobs to survive while auditioning for roles. He worked as a busboy, a shoe store clerk, even a piece of living art painting himself silver and standing still in the streets of Soho for coins. These experiences hardened him, gave him resilience, and fed his hunger to succeed. Yet, the demons never left. Addiction was always in the background, a shadow passed down from his father, a secret he carried inside. Even as he landed small roles, even as his talent was noticed, he could feel that pull, that chemical escape he had first been introduced to as a child. Looking back, it's easy to see how the seeds of Robert Downey Jr.'s downfall were planted long before fame arrived. He had the charisma, the acting genius, the drive to succeed, but he also had instability, unresolved pain, and a dangerous relationship with substances that had been normalized since boyhood. The boy who smiled in front of the camera was already fighting an invisible battle, and as his star began to rise, those shadows would follow him. Because no matter how much talent he possessed, Robert Downey Jr. was carrying a broken childhood with him into adulthood. In that childhood, the drugs, the chaos, the absence of safety would nearly destroy him once Hollywood placed him under the brightest spotlight of all. Part 3. Rise to Fame. When Robert Downey Jr. left school at 17 to chase acting in New York, few believed he would become anything more than another struggling dreamer. Yet almost immediately, his talent began to shine. With sharp cheekbones, magnetic eyes, and an almost reckless energy, he had what casting directors craved: presence. On stage and screen, he wasn't just performing, he was living. In 1985, he landed his first major breakthrough, a spot on Saturday Night Live. For most young actors, this would have been the start of a golden path. But the cast that year struggled and ratings dipped. Downey was let go after just one season. It could have ended there. Instead, he doubled down. He pushed harder, refusing to let rejection derail him. By the mid-1982nd, his persistence paid off. He landed roles in Weird Science, 1985, and The Pickup Artist, 1987, but it was Less Than Zero that set him apart. In the film, he played Julian, a wealthy Los Angeles teenager who spirals into drug addiction. Critics praised his haunting realism, his ability to capture the manic highs and devastating lows of substance abuse. What audiences didn't know was that Downey wasn't just acting, he was reflecting his own growing dependence. The line between character and reality blurred. Hollywood, however, was captivated. His intensity, his raw honesty on screen, made him one of the most promising actors of his generation. In 1992, he reached the pinnacle of early acclaim when he was cast as Charlie Chaplin in Chaplin. The role was a gamble. How could a young American actor embody one of cinema's most beloved icons? But Downey committed himself completely. He trained for months, mastering Chaplin's posture, accent, and even his comedic timing. The result was extraordinary. Chaplin earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Overnight, he was no longer just a rising star, he was an artist. Critics hailed him as a genius, the future of Hollywood. Directors wanted him. Studios courted him. For a brief moment, it seemed Robert Downey Jr. had everything. The 1992nd became his era of promise. He starred in Heart and Souls, 1993, Only You, 1994, and Restoration, 1995. Each performance showcased his versatility. From comedy to romance to drama, he was unpredictable, magnetic, the kind of actor who made audiences forget they were watching a movie. But behind the camera, a darker truth was unfolding. Fame had given him everything, yet it also exposed the cracks formed in childhood. Surrounded by Hollywood excess, Downey slipped deeper into the very addictions he had portrayed on screen. The substances that once seemed like harmless experimentation now became shackles. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol, he was no longer in control. Still, directors continued to hire him. His talent was undeniable. Even when he showed up late, even when rumors of his drug use swirled, his performances remained brilliant. He was the kind of actor who could walk into chaos and transform it into art. And for a while, Hollywood looked the other way. By the late 1992nd, however, the cracks widened. On set, his behavior grew erratic. In life, his arrests multiplied. But in these early years of fame, the world still saw the charming, witty, endlessly gifted star. Few realized how close he was to losing everything. There is a cruel irony to Robert Downey Jr. Pieces rise, the very qualities that made him great, the intensity, the fearlessness, the ability to lose himself in a role were also the qualities that left him vulnerable to addiction. He didn't just play characters, he became them. And as his career soared, his demons stayed close, waiting for the moment to strike. The boy who grew up surrounded by drugs had now become a man celebrated by the world, yet he carried the same broken foundation, the same dangerous habits. Hollywood had found its new golden boy, but Robert Downey Jr. was about to find his fall. Part Fear, Dark Side, Downfall. By the mid-1992nd, Robert Downey Jr. was at the peak of his promise. He had been nominated for an Oscar, worked with acclaimed directors, and was widely regarded as one of the most gifted actors of his generation. To the public, he was charming, magnetic, endlessly talented. But beneath the surface, his life was unraveling. The shadows that had haunted him since childhood instability, addiction, recklessness, now took center stage. What began as experimentation became dependency. What started as indulgence became obsession. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol, Downey was trapped in a cycle that blurred the line between survival and self-destruction. In 1996, the first major collapse came. He was arrested for possession of heroin, cocaine, and an unloaded handgun. The incident made headlines, shocking fans who still clung to the image of him as Hollywood's golden boy. But this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, in a haze of drugs, Downey broke into a neighbor's home and was found passed out in a child's bed. The bizarre incident became a symbol of just how far he had fallen his addiction. No longer a private battle, but a public spectacle. Courts gave him chance after chance. Judges sent him to rehab, imposed probation, ordered him to clean up. Each time, he seemed to make progress only to relapse again. His struggles became tabloid fodder. Mugshots of the once celebrated actor appeared in newspapers around the world. The more he tried to hide, the more exposed he became. By 1999, the courts had run out of patience. After repeated violations of his probation, Downey was sentenced to nearly a year in a California state prison. For a man who had once walked red carpets, the reality of prison was a brutal fall. Gone were the flashing lights and adoring fans. Now, there were cold cells, steel bars, and the crushing silence of consequence. His career collapsed in tandem. Studios no longer wanted him. Producers refused to insure him, making him unhireable. Roles that might have belonged to him went to other actors. Hollywood, once enamored, turned its back. He had become a liability too unpredictable, too dangerous, too broken. Even when he managed to land roles, his demons followed him. In 2000, he earned critical acclaim for his performance on the television show Ally McBeal. His presence electrified the series, and audiences once again remembered his brilliance. For a moment, it looked like a comeback, but just as quickly, it was gone. Arrested again for drug possession, he was written out of the show. The Golden Globe he won that year only deepened the tragedy, a reminder of wasted potential, of talent smothered by addiction. Personally, the damage was equally devastating. His marriage to actress and singer Deborah Falconer, already strained, collapsed under the weight of his addiction. His young son Indio grew up with a father who was often absent, either on set, in court, or in rehab. Downey later admitted that his greatest shame was not the prison sentences or the headlines it was failing as a father. By the early 2002, Robert Downey Jr. had become Hollywood's cautionary tale. To some, he was a genius, destroyed by weakness. To others, he was a symbol of the destructive power of fame and drugs. For Downey himself, he was simply lost. He described his addiction as being trapped in a car, speeding toward a cliff, unable to stop. He knew where it would lead. He knew he was killing himself, but he couldn't press the brakes. The lowest points were brutal. Alone, unemployed, and constantly under the gaze of paparazzi, Downey seemed destined for tragedy. Many believed his story would end with an overdose, another headline in the long list of Hollywood stars destroyed by addiction. But even in the darkness, sparks of resilience remained. Downey himself would later reflect on those years with brutal honesty. "It's like I had a shotgun in my mouth, and I liked the taste of metal." He knew he was on the edge of death, and yet, somewhere inside, the will to fight flickered. The world, however, had stopped believing in him. Directors refused to take the risk. Studios slammed the door. Friends distanced themselves. Even those who once admired him assumed the story was over. Robert Downey Jr., The boy who had dazzled in Chaplin, the man who once seemed unstoppable, was finished. Or so it seemed. Because sometimes rock bottom is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of something no one expects. Part 5. Climax and Redemption. By the early 2002, Robert Downey Jr. had reached what many believe was the end of his story. He was a fallen star, his reputation shredded, his career destroyed, and his body wrecked by years of addiction. He had been in and out of prisons, rehab centers, and halfway houses so many times that it felt like a revolving door. For Hollywood, he was finished, a man who once had the world at his feet, now too toxic to touch. But fate has a strange way of testing those who seem beyond saving. In 2003, Robert was cast in the thriller Gotica, starring Halle Berry. The production was a modest one, hardly a career revival, but on that set, he met someone who would alter the course of his life forever. Susan Levin, the film's producer. She was intelligent, disciplined, and grounded everything Robert wasn't. Their connection was immediate, but Susan saw the truth behind the charm. She knew his reputation, she knew the risks. So she gave him an ultimatum: if he wanted a life with her, he had to get clean. It was the first real moment of clarity in years. Downey realized that this wasn't another judge, another studio, another headline. This was life or death. Either he would lose the one person who believed in him, or he would finally break free. And so began his redemption. Robert committed himself to sobriety with a ferocity equal to the way he once indulged in excess. He underwent therapy, practiced martial arts, and embraced meditation. He learned discipline where before there had only been chaos. Step by painful step, he clawed his way out of the abyss. The world barely noticed at first. After all, Hollywood had already written him off, but those who knew him saw the change. For the first time in decades, Robert Downey Jr. was not just surviving, he was living. Small roles followed. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, 2005, directed by Shane Black, gave him a chance to showcase his wit, his timing, his brilliance. Though modest at the box office, the film reminded critics of the actor they had once admired. Then came Zodiac, 2007, where he held his own alongside Jake Gyllenhaal and Mark Ruffalo, earning praise for his sharp, unpredictable energy. The industry began to whisper maybe Robert Downey Jr. still has something left to give, but no one could have predicted what came next. In 2008, Marvel Studios made a decision that would change cinema forever. They were launching a risky new film, Iron Man. Unlike Spider-Man or Batman, Iron Man wasn't a household name. The success of the movie and the future of what would become the Marvel Cinematic Universe depended entirely on the actor chosen to play Tony Stark. The studio was hesitant. Insurance companies refused to cover Downey. Executives feared his past would overshadow the film, but director Jon Favreau fought for him. To Favreau, there was no one else who could play Tony Stark. The arrogance, the charm, the genius, masking deep wounds, it wasn't just acting. Robert Downey Jr. was Tony Stark. It was a gamble that could have destroyed Marvel before it began. Instead, it made history. Iron Man premiered in May 2008 and was an instant sensation. Downey's performance electrified audiences. He wasn't simply playing a superhero, he was reinventing the idea of one. Tony Stark was flawed, cocky, haunted by mistakes, and that authenticity came directly from Robert's own scars. Critics hailed it as the role he was born to play. The film grossed over $580 million, launching the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which would go on to become the most successful film franchise in history. Overnight, Robert Downey Jr. transformed from a Hollywood pariah to its most bankable star. He became the face of Marvel, carrying films like The Avengers and Iron Man to billion-dollar success. By 2015, he was the highest-paid actor in the world, earning tens of millions for every film. The man, once considered uninsurable, was now the cornerstone of an empire. But beyond the money, beyond the fame, was something greater: redemption. Robert had proven that no one is beyond saving. He married Susan Levin in 2005, and together they built a family, raising 2 children. She remained his anchor, the person who had seen through the chaos and demanded the man beneath emerge. The climax of his life was not Iron Man's triumph, but Robert's ended. Against every odd, he rewrote his destiny. Still, his redemption wasn't about erasing the past. His scars remained, his mistakes undeniable. But instead of destroying him, They became the source of his power. Tony Stark's journey from reckless playboy to selfless hero mirrored Robert's own transformation. The line between character and actor vanished. To the world, Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man. And yet, his story was bigger than Marvel, bigger than Hollywood. It was about a man who had stood on the edge of oblivion, stared into the abyss, and chosen to climb back. From prison cells to the red carpets of global premieres, from mugshots to superhero posters, Robert Downey Jr.'s life became the ultimate narrative of fall and resurrection. A reminder that even when the world gives up on you, you can still choose to rise. Part 6. Legacy. Reflection. Today, Robert Downey Jr. stands not only as the man who brought Iron Man to life, but as a symbol of resilience. His story is not a polished fairy tale, it is a saga of failure, consequence, and redemption. From a boy introduced to drugs before he was old enough to understand their meaning, to a man whose mugshots once defined him, he clawed his way back to become the highest paid actor in Hollywood. His legacy is far greater than box office numbers or superhero costumes. It lies in the message his life sends that no one is too far gone, that even the deepest scars can heal, that even in the darkest valleys there is still a road back to light. In Hollywood, where so many stars have been lost to addiction, Robert Downey Jr. became the rare exception, the one who lived to tell the tale, who turned his wounds into wisdom and his failures into fuel. To millions of fans, he is Iron Man. But to those who look closer, he is something even more powerful proof that redemption is possible. We celebrate his triumphs, but we cannot forget the pain that shaped them. Because behind the billion-dollar films and the red carpets is still the boy who was broken too soon and the man who chose to rebuild himself. Robert Downey Jr. As life reminds us that heroes are not born perfect. They are forged in fire, scarred by mistakes, and defined by the courage to rise again. And that is why his story will outlast the Marvel Universe. Because long after the credits roll, Robert Downey Jr. remains what he always was. Not just Iron Man on screen, but a survivor in life.